Hello, and welcome to the Weekly Scroll Podcast. My name is Ryan, and today we are going to be doing an episode 2 of the Liminal Horror Writing Seminar with Josh Domanski. How you doing today, Josh?
I'm doing well.
Good. So what is, for those that didn't watch the first one, go watch it. It's great. It is on all the links. We'll make sure that it's linked below. But what is number 2 here? What is the plan for today?
Sure. Yeah. So if you're just joining us for this second episode, I suppose, the Liminal Horror Writing Seminar series is infrequent that we're going to be doing it. But the idea is that we want to support other folk with making their own liminal horror content, either for use at their table or direct publication. Either way, these hints and tips are supposed to sort of give a peek behind the curtain at the stuff that we're thinking about as we develop our own modules, and then in theory help you develop yours as well. If you were here for the first one, that covered adapting existing stories into content that you can use at your table. The idea being that modern horror, it's not always easy to convert stuff like old modules or like a movie you saw on television and then bring those to your tables, even if they have really cool ideas. So if you haven't seen that first episode, most of that stuff is still pretty good in terms of the knowledge that we impart. A lot of that is going to what we're talking about today builds off of those original ideas. So go ahead and go watch that at your leisure. The VOD is on the Weekly Scrolls channel somewhere in there. This second episode, what we're going to be talking about is short form content. And I don't really like using that word, but I don't have a better term for it. But I'll talk a little bit about what I mean in a second here. But the idea is that, smaller stuff as opposed to big, large modules. But before we get to that, a few things. First, for those that follow along with the liminal horror line, there is a reason that we're doing this, now as opposed to literally whenever. The first is that Hungry Hollow, our first hardcover module, is making its way to backers right now from the backer kit, but it should be available through Space Penguin Inc. Imminently. We are giving it a couple weeks for folks to get theirs and to to deal with the any of the issues with shipping and whatnot. But the idea is by the end of the month, we'll see. I think we're gonna hit that. But so the book came out great as far as I'm concerned. We do a quick flip through here. A nice 6x9. I'm pretty happy with how the printing came out and all that shit. So if you missed out of the backer kit, you will be able to get your hands on one of these soon, as well as some of the other modules that we have present on Space Penguin, including the Bloom, and there's one night at the Shelterwood Inn, and I think we're getting a few more like third-party stuff coming in the future, so keep an eye out. But the second thing here, the first Liminal Horror Writing Seminar was done to support the Twisted Classics game jam over on itch.io. The idea being that we wanted people to create, what we call Twisted Classics here, which are reimaginings of other stories brought up to speed and kind of twisted for modern horror. That jam has completed as of a few weeks ago, I think at this point. We got like 32 entries, I think, something like that. So really, really cool stuff there from our third-party community. We did just select our winner. That's In Extremis, I believe. So you say it, if I remember correctly. But that is basically Event Horizon on a boat in the middle of the Great Lakes. It's super fucking cool. We had a lot of thoughts on who we were gonna, bring as our winner, and then In Extremis comes out and it blows us all out of the water, and so that has limited copies available through Neva Cups. They only had a handful of them. I don't know if they're still available, but they are printed. If you want to get an early look at that, we are going to do another print run sometime in the future, but we're kind of figuring that out behind the scenes. But go check out the other entries through the itch.io page, especially if you're looking for more like liminal horror stuff to bring to your games. And then finally, mostly the reason we're here today, we have opened up a new game jam that submissions open tomorrow, but you can go back the page right now. It is the Horrors of the Americas jam. The idea for this one is that we're going to run from, next Monday, the 7th, through early 2025, probably a couple months into 2025. There's no huge rush to get stuff in. But the idea is we want to see a lot of like little pieces, little bits and bobs that you could bring to your table. They could be small adventures, they could be just creatures, maybe locations to explore, all the fun, good stuff in little bite-sized chunks. We want to see everybody making that for our community. And then in the end, we're going to take what we can fit and bring it into a, maybe 200-page softcover 6x9 book through print on demand. Can't guarantee that every entry is going to make it into it, especially if the size doesn't work out. But the idea is we, in the previous Game Jam Twisted Classics, we wanted to bring one project to print. That was sort of the goal. In the Horror of the Americas Jam, we want to bring everyone's project to print. So go find the page, go join us on the Liminal Horror Discord server to help talk about your ideas. And hopefully this, writing seminar will kind of help you guys along when you start making your own. But with that in mind, I want to talk quickly about what I mean by short form horror. There's a few angles to this. The first is sort of on basic level, the things that you can prep to spend sort of the least amount of time doing prep for your home sessions. If you can write a page of content in an hour, maybe that gets you 2 or 3 sessions. The things to sort of focus on so you're not like spending ages and ages just to bring something for 1 3-hour session. However, if you want to publish that, then these tips will help you if you want to give that to someone for them to use in their own home games or campaigns. And then the idea being that most of this stuff is kind of focused on like the one shot. Some of the things we're going to talk about are definitely, good for longer things, like 2 to 3 sessions. But the idea is that these pieces of short form content are mostly self-contained, easy to pick up, easy to use. And like I've got here, the key is that they're quick to use. We want people to be able to pick them up. It's you for your home game or the future GM who is picking these up for their own sessions. Do 10 minutes worth of reading and then be good to go. So what I mean by this could be, tables, could be plot hooks, various creatures and NPCs, resonant artifacts, factions, or full-on scenarios. And I'll kind of be talking about each one of these things in turn as we go on here. I will note that if you are watching us live at the moment, the idea is that this is supposed to be sort of conversational. I don't want to just talk at the screen the entire time. If you guys have questions, please shout them out in the chat. And then we will kind of, talk about them as they come up as we're, going through each of these topics here. So if you're watching live, give us a hand, shout out some questions. Now, before we dive in, I wanted to talk about resources. These are things that you can go look at right now that I think are really good examples of what short form horror content. We have some from a liminal horror perspective. The first here is The Vanished. The Vanished is something I wrote a couple years ago. I've got a copy of it right here. It was previously a submission to the one-page dungeon contest. It got one of the Winter Circles awards for that. I think it was in 2021 or 2022. I don't really remember off the top of my head. But then I went through and expanded it for the Fear bundle through the Lost Bay. So you can get like a poster form of it if you can still get that bundle. But the digital version of this is available as well. But the idea being that this is office-based horror. It is a small dungeon, and it's all contained on one page. This is easy enough for minimum 1 session, potentially 2 sessions, depending on how long your group takes. Then the one that we just worked on recently is called Recursive Transit. That was my entry to this year's one-page dungeon contest, and they just announced the winners on that. The Recursive Transit took home the Best in Theme and another Winter Circle award. So, I think it's a pretty good one-page dungeon, but so do a panel of judges too. So that's available digitally. You can find it in the Twisted Classics Jam collection because I submitted it as part of that as well. We are going to be doing a full liminal horror conversion of that in the future, so keep your eyes peeled if you want stats, because right now it's pretty system agnostic. Another couple of things here. As part of the jam support, we just released a couple of weeks ago, I think at this point, it's hasn't been too long. But the project is called Case Files Volume 1. What these are, they're 3 little bite-sized pieces of, horror content. We got a faction, we have a creature, and we have a full-on scenario as 3 of those there. The idea being is that those are specifically examples of things that we would love to see for this coming jam. So go check those out. They're only available digitally at the moment. And then a few more things here. I think it's 2 years ago now. It's been a little bit, but we did the Tales for the Void Kickstarter project that was bringing 3 pamphlets from our friends basically to come in and make little trifold pamphlets for Liminal Horror. We had Zach Hazard, Valpen, Evelyn Moreau, and Matt Morris come and make them. These are all really, really good examples of Liminal Horror trifold pamphlets. We do have the chair in printed format. The other 2 you can get digitally through their respective itch.io pages. But the chair specifically is one location. You're in this house, you're trapped in there, and you're trying to figure your way out, and there's a creepy fucking chair that your players are going to want to sit in to deal with. And then finally, there is Liminal High School. That is another project from Evelyn. The idea being that while Liminal Horror itself is focused on, mainly adults, dealing with the horrors, Liminal High School takes that and brings your characters to high school. The reason I want to recommend this is because it's primarily, at the moment, it's like 8 or 9 pages, and it's a series of tables that you can roll on for generating characters and scenarios and stuff. I know Evelyn is working on an expansion currently, but this is another really good example of just like short form tables that can inspire your own sessions here. I did want to break down a bunch of other things that are not directly related to Liminal Horror specifically, but are really good examples of the type of stuff I'm talking about here from kind of across the spectrum. I will be discussing why I'm choosing each of these as well. So the first is The Haunting of Ypsilon 14. Ypsilon 14. This is a trifold pamphlet. It's from Mothership. For the longest time, this was like the best thing they had for their starter adventures. I know they did a series of pamphlets early on. This is the best of them. This is also like one of the best trifold pamphlets I've ever read, just in terms of how it uses its space and what it gives you for tools. All trifold pamphlets are frameworks. They're never going to give you everything because you only have 2 pages to do it. So the goal is to do just enough where the GM can take it and add just a little bit and run their sessions. So Epsilon 14 has a creature, just one, that sort of causes havoc there. It's very easy to track. There are 10 different NPCs. That's probably the biggest thing to kind of get over when you are a new GM trying to run it, is managing all these people. But there are some tips and such to figure that out. But primarily, it uses its space in a very, very clever manner, where the text for the layout is built directly into the map of the station itself. So you don't need to waste space with this one, having both a map and text. It's all like perfectly fit and perfectly written to be within that, that framing here. So go check this out if you haven't seen it. If you're especially interested in trifold pamphlets, like I said, this is one of the best I've ever found, and I love trifold pamphlets. Continuing forward on sort of the Mothership train of things, we got a couple more here. The first is the Dissonant Whispers Adventure Anthology book. I think you can still get this. This is a collection of about 62-page adventures. Maybe like a third of them are from Mothership. About half of them are sort of just system agnostic. And then there's stuff like there's a bunch for Merkborg. I think there's a couple for Electric Bastion Land, some for like BXD&D and stuff. I think I've run about a dozen of these. This is the book that got me into a bunch of different systems back in, I think it was 2020. It is the reason I write. That's because I bought this book and I started looking at these systems. So I cannot recommend this enough. There are some fantastic adventures in here. And like I said, I'm gonna just flip to one randomly. This is, 2-page spread. We've got your basic text and information you here. You get your creature, and then you've got your map all contained within 2 pages. This is a full letter size, so it's a little bigger than what we're looking for in terms of the jam. But either way, like if you have never read this before, I this is one of like 3 products I would recommend anybody pick up because it's like fucking fantastic. This is also where a lot of future mothership projects have spun out of, because it was this big creative endeavor with a bunch of people kind of working together to do this in like, I think it's like 2 weeks or something crazy. And then that kind of spawned a whole bunch of other really cool mothership projects as well, as those people continue to collaborate. I've run this one too, Incident at Muto Station. A nice little, what's it even, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, it was like 10 locations here, all pretty simple. You got a really fucked up creature. One of the best sessions I've ever run was this adventure right here. So if you're going to pick this up and you're going to look at one, the Incident at Muto Station, gold standard. Continuing forward on the mothership train, we have Hull Breach. Hull Breach is basically the spiritual successor to Distant Whispers, at least on the mothership side. It's a lot of those teams that had formed back in that original book came to continue to collaborate to do, Hull Breach. It's done through Anodyne Printware here. It's Ian Newsom's brand. Just another bunch of short, like 6 to 10 page adventures. Everything is designed so perfectly to be able to use at the table in like the spread formats that they have here. The layout is fucking fantastic. The adventures, they hit hard. Again, I've run, I think 4 things from this book in a little mini campaign I did last year. Went phenomenal. Like I absolutely love this. Again, one of like 3 things I would recommend everybody pick up. Especially if you like sci-fi and horror, just from a formatting and writing perspective, is another but gold standard. This is fantastic. To branch off into fantasy for a little bit, the Merry Meshmen, who many folks know from their Knock series of blog collections, they put out the Folklore Bestiary, I think it was last year, sometime fairly recently here. But what this is, it is a bestiary. It sounds like it, but it's as the name implies, it's all based off of old folklore creatures and taking those and adapting them for old school essentials, effectively. So that type of fantasy, D&D fantasy. But there are a number of really cool examples in here. I want to see if I can pull one open, where they'll do a page on a monster, sometimes 4 to 6 pages, but then you will occasionally get full adventures included as well, where they'll give you the here we go. This is a good one. I cannot say what this says, but Lou Carcoal. So this creature is a massive snail, effectively. So you get your first little introductory page here, kind of detailing what this creature is. You get like the stats, you get a nice piece of art here, and then for the next page, they give you a full adventure where you get to go inside the snail itself and, as a dungeon. So yeah, that's just, it's 5 pages, and there's so much that they give you within those 5 pages right here. And this book is just full of examples like that. You could run, 3 sessions with just those 5 pages, and that takes you 15 minutes to read if you're doing, a little bit of prep, maybe a little more than that if you want to get the stats down. But highly recommended, especially if you're running like fantasy games and campaigns, and you need, extra shit to throw in there. But this is one of the things that honestly inspired the Horse of the America Jam and how we want to present it is this book right here. Then we've got the Monster Overhaul, another bestiary, gold standard bestiary, hands down. It's a big book, but you get, it is very usable. This is one of the biggest pieces of inspiration for the bestiary that we're writing for the Liminal Horror Deluxe Edition. How to take basic creatures and give them more. We can do stats all day long, but that's not necessarily the most useful thing in the world, especially if you're looking at this creature. We can tell you it's a horror thing that crawls from another dimension, but how do you use that at the table? Well, you give it a bunch of extra shit. So we can look at here. This is the Biscuit Golem. So they give you the stats, they give you a little picture, they give you each of these pages is sort of custom designed to fit one of these creatures, but they give you a whole bunch of roll tables and stuff that are really useful, especially if you like that emergent narrative at the table. So you've got 1d10, why this biscuit golem must die. So that's your adventure hooks right there. Somebody is telling you you need to kill this biscuit golem, so you get 10 reasons why you might do that, and you pick the one or roll on the table that might affect your group the best. You've got a menu right here. So this is the various ways that each different biscuit golem variation here and the various effects that the magics that have within them can kind of contain here. And then you got a couple extra other tables here. What is the biscuit golem doing? Who made this biscuit golem? So you take this one creature, you roll on 4 tables, you take the results, there's your adventure right there. Maybe you need to pull in a house or a location, but once you have those 4 things, that's all you need to start building. And this is one example in like a 400-page book here. So another one of the things, if you do not have this, you don't necessarily need to get physical. I like the physical copy, but such a good bestiary. To quickly kind of touch on a few other things here. If you like one-page dungeons or one-page adventures, the Trilemma adventures are, pretty much the gold standard. There are a ton of them at this point. I think there's 3 or 4 volumes or something. There we go. Yeah, there's one of the volumes. I don't know the physical. I missed out on the good quality print on demand when they went back and Drive-Thru RPG kind of changed the quality for their print books, and I was sad I missed it. But I've run a few of them. I even did. There was a circus adventure that I converted to Agents of the Odd, which is very close to Liminal Horror. So there is some application there, but those are just really good one-page adventures. And then we've got from the Merkborg team, or at least Stockholm Cartel, there are 2 books. There are Thoughts and Prayers, and there are Cut Purse. I don't think you can get Thoughts and Prayers anymore. You can still get Cut Purse. I just checked out their website the other day. What these are, they're convention books, effectively, where the folks at Stockholm Cartel they just write a bunch of shit for their home games, and then they hand it over to Nor, who takes it and puts them together in these little collections. They've done one a year for the last 2 years. But the idea being that these are supposed to be their convention exclusives, but they go and they sell, whatever's left on their website. But it is a collection of a bunch of stuff. It's adventures. It's, we got a little 2-page spread adventure here. It's a skull fungus, I think, piece of art. There are a curated collection of public domain art, which you can go find and use for your own adventures and stuff. I do really like this one. It's gross looking dwarves. And then you will find, let me see if I can find one here. I know that they've done short form fiction here, where somebody's just writing a little story within 2 pages. And then you get items and weapons with a whole bunch of art and stuff here. Cut Purse is the same way. This is the one I know you can get, but this one's a little, I think it's a risograph print, but here is, a bunch of monsters and a cool piece of art. We have there's a little scenario based on thieves, and a dozen short adventure seeds and events, and along with a really cool piece of art. And I guarantee most of you could do something that looks just as cool, because this is pretty simple, all things considered. But again, if you want to look at short form content that is Merkborg and the stuff that Stockholm Cartel does is very much horror adjacent at the very least, or horror specific. Another really good thing to get your hands on. And then the final 2, just real quick. Rimbound Transmissions are a series of pamphlets done by Stella Condry. They are from Mothership. I think there are 13 of them at this point. Another one of the things I missed out on the print for, but you can still get all the digitals. I think they're free at the moment. Just a ton of really good examples. I love the stuff that Stella does. And I think this was 1 a month for a year, something like that. But it's adventures, it's NPCs, it's just little bits and bobs for your mothership campaigns. But again, it's a really good example of what you can do with the limited format there and what you can cram into, you know, a trifold pamphlet. And then the final thing here, if you guys have not ever come across Nature May of Highland Paranormal Society and you want to write short form content, go correct that immediately. Nature May is credited as being the progenitor of the Trifold Dungeon, you know, using the Trifold pamphlet. That is at least where Sean McCoy gets it for the Mothership stuff. And I have never found anybody who did it earlier than Nature May. But Nate does a Patreon that I don't think it's every month, but something comes out pretty frequently. You know, little short adventures, like 5-room dungeons, pamphlets, and whole 9 yards there. Some really great stuff. I've read a bunch of Nate's stuff before in the past. Always a good time. But again, a very, very good examples of what you can cram into just tiny spaces, because Nate loves doing small form stuff like postcard dungeons. I've seen a few of those. They're all fucking fantastic. So if you need to look at anything to bring your own, you know, horrors of the Americas ideas, this is a really great place to start. You know, everything that we have listed here, there's just so much more as well. These are the ones that I, you know, thought of immediately. And if you need more stuff to look at, come tag us on the Discord and find us. We can always provide more information and stuff to find to help you guys along. All right, now getting into the actual like tips and tricks here. Well, first we're going to start with tables. Now, again, I don't really want to spend a ton of time on all of these things. We're trying to wrap this up pretty quick. So if you got questions on these topics, get them out now while I'm currently talking about them so we can hit them in before I move on to the next slide. So there's really just one main tip here. I'll talk about that in a sec. But what I mean by tables in the context of liminal horror is a lot of things. You know, you can use them for your void crawl. I don't have one of those on hand. Damn. Oh, well, I got the Hungry Hollow one. Where did I put that? I will talk a little bit more specifically about the Void Crawl in just a second here, because it marks one of my tips. Yep. So the Void Crawl is our overloaded encounter die system. It's just, you know, it's a standard encounter die, and we added a bunch of shit to it to make other things happen during a session here. But if you have never read one of our modern adventures, you know, the last two I think that we did, Void Crawls, we've started to add them in, where it's a, you know, D6 encounter check, and then there are a bunch of subtables that you can use as needed. If you're writing your own Void Crawl, you're going to encounter something very similar. So that's a good table. Maybe you want to have random items, or Fallout is another one specific to Mothership to Liminal Horror. Maybe if you're writing a creature, you want to do some different variations. So you put them in a little table there that somebody can roll on. And then with creatures, you can have their behaviors. You know, are they friendly to your group? Are they antagonistic? And then you can always do, you know, fun little character details, either for your investigators, you know, like the bonds that you may have, the equipment you may have, the stuff from basic character creation, or if you're trying to make like NPCs, and maybe you want like a spark table, a bunch of details you can quickly pull together when you need an NPC. So that's sort of what I mean by tables here. And the general advice here is that this is going to apply to all of them. It is always going to be better if you focus on your best ideas. You do not feel compelled to expand your tables simply for the sake of it. You know, you don't necessarily need a D20 table. I'll talk about that in a minute here. But especially if you're writing this for publication, for your home games, do whatever. You know, I don't really care. But if you're going to send this out and give it to somebody to use and run, you want to put your best ideas forward. You know, if you got 6 really good ideas, but you're like, I want to do a D10 table, maybe don't do that. You maybe just make that the D6. There are ways to adapt it to make those ideas a little bit more universal. But you shouldn't ever feel compelled just to fill that number for the sake of it, because you don't want 6 good ideas and 4 shit ideas, because, you know, there's a 40% chance that somebody who's using your table is going to roll the shit ideas. So again, if you can make your table contained and it makes sense for the context of your adventure, put your best ideas forward. Now, as part of this is sort of the first, bullet tip here. When you're designing your tables, consider how many times this table is actually going to be used. Now, I'll give an example for void crawls. Void crawls a D6 table. You're rolling that every 15 minutes or so. During the daytime, you only count the first 3 results, and during night or like dangerous situations, you count all 6. In Hungry Hollow, we built one that's sort of the nothing happens, so there's really only 5 entries on this table, but we kind of adapt it to what we think is best for the particular adventure that we're writing. I want to focus on one of these things, the day encounter. That's a result of 1 on the void crawl. So day encounters are typically strange things that are happening that might devolve into chaos and violence, but they're not inherently built around that. They're just, if you're in a populated area, there's sort of the strange encounters with the residents there, or things that cue your investigators that something weird is happening, but they're not immediately like threatening, even if they might devolve into threatening things later on. So a day encounter is a 1 on the void crawl table. So when you are in a session, let's say you have a 3-hour session. If you are sort of religious to our prescriptive use here, and you're rolling that every 20 minutes, that's 3 rolls an hour. If you're doing a 6 or 3-hour session, that's 9 rolls per session. If you are, rolling that D6, you're looking for 1 for your day encounters. You have 9 rolls. You might only hit that once a session, maybe twice a session based on the math. Because there's a 1 in 6 chance you're only making 9 rolls for the void crawl across a session. So Hungry Hollow is built for about 6 sessions. That's sort of the basis that we used for it. When I ran it, I did 10, I think. So it probably extends a little bit more. But that's the idea, is that, we built the Doom clock for 1 each session. So our ideal is 6 sessions here. How's math work? I don't know. So if you assume 2 encounters per session, 2 day encounters per session, and you have 6 sessions that we're planning on running for, at a maximum, you're only going to have 12 day encounters, depending on how fate works for you. But, we're talking averages here for writing here. So the thing is, do we need 12 items on the list as a result? No, we can get away with less. We did D10 because it's kind of fun to do D10s here, but each of these is written in such a way to be a little generic. We have an encounter with the sheriff here, the mayor out visiting, things that that will change. The situation around these will change depending on the context with which they're rolled within. Even if you are rolling the same entry twice, it's going to be different because of where the encounter occurs. So even if you might have 12 day encounters, you don't need 12 entries. You can just write them to be a little more generic. Keep your best ideas forward and don't cram that table. We also don't have room to put 12 because of the way we did layout. So keep that in mind. Think of how often you're going to be rolling on these tables. If it's just the creature behavior, how many times are they going to encounter this creature? Is it one big monster for the entire adventure? Is it like zombies where you're going to find a billion of them? If it's one creature, you're trying to do 3 sessions, maybe you only need like a D4 table of behavior, D6. It doesn't need to be complicated. You don't need to just fill ideas, like I said. So think about it. How often will you use it? How many times you need to roll? How does the math work out for your designed scope here? And then design your tables around it. Now, tables are versatile. You can have your simple, D6, D8, D10, what have you. You can also do weighted tables, your 2D6, 2D8, 2D10, so on and so forth. Those create the distribution curves when you're rolling those dice that heavily favor sort of the center results. These work really well for like behavior tables where, you know, if you're encountering a citizen, they're generally going to be pretty, you know, neutral or friendly to you, but on occasion maybe you find an asshole. You know, not everyone's an asshole, so there's a lower result on your table. You know, you put that on the 2 as opposed to the, you know, the 6 right in the center. So you can use that to your advantage, even with small, even like D4s. You can use the weighting. If your creature, your NPCs, are going to react commonly in one way and then less commonly in other ways, design your tables to, you know, help facilitate it. And then sort of the final thing is like, does your table need to be there at all? You don't need to have randomization. You know, sometimes you can just say, you know, this zombie is gonna try and kill you. You don't have to make it variable. If it's easier for the GM to run it in a very specified way, you just state it. We don't need this to be random all the time. So consider your purpose. Consider how much it's going to be used, and consider how you might better design those tables to suit your intended outcomes. That's sort of the long and short of it here. Now, moving on. All right, so this next one here, plot hooks. So what do I mean by plot hook? And this is, in general, plot hook is sort of the basic introductory matter for your scenarios. They tell you what the horror is, why it's threatening, how the investigators get involved, and that's important, and then the consequences of inaction. So the way I like to think about this is, if you ever watch X-Files or Supernatural, before the title sequence, what both of those shows do is a little prologue where it introduces the monster. It, you know, most of the time the thing kills someone. That's standard affair there. So you introduce the threat. Something creepy is going on here, and it's killing people. Pretty basic one, and that sort of naturally gives incentive for the investigators. If they don't stop this creature, it's going to keep killing people. You know, you can adapt that as you see it fit, but that's sort of an easy basic structure there. So plot hooks, why I want to specify this out here is, one, you can write them for the people. That's pretty good. Give them basic ideas. This is really just, you know, any standard OSR adventure is going to have like your list of hooks. That's not quite what I'm talking about in this context here. This is more of like ideas and concepts that you can write out that can be adapted for your table very easily, or you can hand it to somebody else to run it. A good plot hook, you might not need anything else. If you hand somebody one of these things and it's got, you know, the basic structure that you're going to need to run the adventure, it's in modern horror, maybe you just need a setting. And then there you go, there's your adventure. Maybe a couple of NPCs, you know, 15 minutes worth of prep, piece of cake. So what makes for a good hook? Ideally, these are going to be relatively easy to adapt. If we're writing them for use for other people, this is a little more specific here. If you're writing them for use for your own campaign, it's really just like additional complications or scenarios you want to introduce to your players. So having them be easily adaptable is only going to be beneficial so that you can bring them in when your players do something, you know, out of left field. Like, we're going to leave the main city and go to Springfield. It's like, okay, well, the horror's here, but good luck. And so, but there you go. You've got this plot hook that's ready to go. You can say, oh, this bad thing is happening in Springfield. Oh, look at that. Now, a good thing for the plot hook too is that you should have these be things that your characters that the players are, you know, controlling are going to feel motivated to get involved with. This ties a little bit into sort of a session 0 thing where, you know, when we as players sit down, there's sort of like the unspoken agreement that we are here to play the game. So the players, you should know, theoretically have the social contract of engaging in the things that your GMs are going to present to them. But it makes it a little easier if there is sort of an inherent incentive. Like I talked about the prologue section here, you know, people are dying and your investigators are the only ones that could do something about it. Usually a pretty good plot hook. I like the environment is like tangibly changing as sort of like one of the motivations there, where things are going to be fucked if you don't go and help out, stuff like that. So while the players might know that they want to get involved with, a good plot hook is always going to drive the characters to action as well. You're also going to want the implied escalation of tension. Horror at your table is all about managing tension. That's the primary thing to do. And again, that killing example, if you don't stop the creature, more people are going to die. That is your escalation. It's just going to keep on happening until, the thing is either done killing people or, it just continues onward. So, that's easy. Again, I love the environment is changing thing, because once you reach a certain point, you can't go back. If the entire town is like burnt down or fucked up, then there you go. That's your end state. You've escalated to that point. Maybe you could have prevented it if you had acted. That kind of deal here. And then when you're writing for someone else, when you're writing for publication, what you want your plot hook to be is good enough to inspire your facilitator that you're handing it to convey the information that they need to. We're writing these plot hooks for your own use and for other investigators. They're not necessarily the type of hooks that you're giving directly to your players, but they can be. And what I mean by this is you're giving it to the facilitator, who can then sort of disseminate the information, where you might have this super cool idea that you can give to the facilitator or a GM, but if they have no way to hook in the players from your idea, then it's kind of a useless idea. It's not really going to see time at the table. So keep that in mind. So it's more of like, keep in mind your audience. We're writing for yourself and for the facilitators, but they need to be able to take those and use those ideas. So this might be the foundation of a scenario. We're going to talk about scenarios later. Or I think writing some really good self-contained plot hooks is also good. Right, if you do 4 of them and hand them to somebody, there you go. They have 4 options for what they want to run. They just need to bring in, like I said, Springfield, and you're good to go. So keep that in mind. Multiple uses for this. This is sort of more of a general one. But moving on. All right. Creatures. There's a few different types of creatures that you're going to be writing for your home sessions and publication. This is another one where the Monster Overhaul is going to be a very good point to reference, because that book is fantastic. I've sort of broken this down into 2 different types and how to approach them and think about them when you are writing your own. Again, either for publication or for home use. There are the lesser horrors and the greater horrors. The lesser horrors are, the basics. There are things that are inherently threatening. That's sort of the idea behind them, but they are going to be encountered in number, or they're easy to defeat when they're by themselves and only threatening when they're in groups. Again, I think of zombies as a really good lesser horror, because again, one zombie alone can be a threat depending on the situation, but it's really like the mobs that you need to worry about. And then there's the greater horrors. The greater horrors are more of like, this one thing is going to be the focus of your scenario, or this one big bad evil creature is sort of lording a bunch of other lesser horrors. So you build up and eventually you need to defeat this thing, but for now you're dealing with the smaller ones. So that's sort of the separation here, where, in the Cthulhu mythos, the greater horrors might be like the gods or whatever that they talk about there, but this is situationally dependent to what you might consider greater and lesser here. So when it comes to the lesser horrors, you generally don't need a whole lot here. Liminal Horror is a very light system. The stat blocks are, tiny. So when you're writing them, basic description, some stats, give them an attack. If they're going to swipe at you or use a weapon, D6 is pretty easy. And lesser horrors usually don't have special abilities, but they might have like 1 or 2, depending on what they are specifically. Zombies might spread an infection upon dealing critical damage. That's a pretty easy one. So that's their one special move, but otherwise they just like launch at you and throw their hands. Another thing that we look for a lot of these lesser horrors are quick bullets. You'll find them written into both of the Liminal Horror zines, where they're given a drive, a behavior, and a tactic. Again, this is useful information to have, especially if you're just presenting creatures without any other additional context around them. Not always necessary. Again, the drive, behavior, and tactics of zombies are sort of intrinsic to the genre that they're in. Zombies want to feed. Zombies are going to try and feed, and they're dumb as fuck. So you might not necessarily need to get as detailed as that listing all these things out if it's sort of intrinsic to the creature themselves, but keep it in mind as you're working on them. Providing those small little bits of information might be useful to drive an entire session's worth of content. So you never know. Just consider that when you're writing. Now, the greater horrors, like I said, these are usually like the central focus. I'll talk about Haunting of Epsilon 14 here. A little bit of a spoiler, but the monster here, there is one monster. I would consider this, sort of be the greater horror here. That creature is going to go around, it's going to kill people, and it is a pain in the ass to kill because of its little special conditions. So that is your central focus for this scenario here. We don't need more monsters than that because that's good enough for just as one. But for information design, this is mostly focused on publication. But again, it's going to be helpful for your home games and things to think about. But you want to give enough information for a facilitator to be able to base a session or campaign around these greater horrors. Again, whether they're overlording above lesser or being the central focus like Epsilon 14 here. So beyond just the stats, there are some things to think about. How does a creature interact with its setting? If it's not like baked into a setting in and of itself, what happens if you take this creature and introduce it to, if we're talking about the Americas here, so, take this creature and put it in a Canadian town. How's it going to interact with that town? Again, that's going to drive your plot hooks. That's going to drive the reason the investigators get involved is how this creature is interacting, because that's our hooks right there. Another good thing to consider is how is its presence foreshadowed? Do people go missing? Is there strange yellow goop that appears in random places? These are your clues. Liminal Horror is inherently an investigation game, even though we say that the goal of a liminal horror scenario isn't to solve the mystery, it's to survive it. But these foreshadowing bits are your clues. This is how you inform the player of the thing that they're going to face. Information and clues are toolkits in this case here. So having something baked in that leads you to be prepared, gives you the information you need to go eventually face these horrors. Foreshadowing, great for that. Maybe there's like a big, Cthulhu monster that is infecting residents. So the foreshadowing is that there are infected people. We can even be like real blunt about it. It doesn't have to be these like secret hidden things that you have to, intuit. And then does your creature have any variations? Does it, we're designing these to be widely applicable to a number of, different uses here. So maybe there is an Arctic variation that has white fur, like bears. If your creature is a bear, there's a different bear for every biome. Maybe it changes over time, where if it is metamorphosizing, so let's say that the threat of the scenario is that this creature is growing and that eventually it's going to become something new. This little larva becomes a giant butterfly that terrorizes the town. And then it turns into Mothman, something like that, or maybe it changes when it's damaged or changes its tactics, where if you, deal critical damage to this creature, it might retreat back into its nest to heal. You think of like a vampire, that's a good one, where vampires, need to rest in their coffin to sort of heal their wounds in like a traditional sense there. So if you do critical damage to a vampire, it's going to disappear if you haven't killed it yet. So it runs away to heal. So that's a variation. That's sort of the things I'm talking about here. These are versatile things. These make scenarios more interesting. It gives you more dynamics. It gives you tactics, if we want to use that term here. But specifying these variations is a good cue to your GMs, again, about how to use them and how to think about how they want to use them. If a vampire has to go to its coffin to heal, that's going to tell you something about how to run that vampire, where a vampire's not going to necessarily run straight into a crowd and go blah, 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 and try and kill people. It's going to be a little deceptive because it is vulnerable. So it's going to lure its victim into the dark alleyway before feasting upon its neck, just to kind of limit the threat there. So again, variations, keep that in mind. And then finally, because this is liminal horror, does your greater horror have any custom fallout? I love doing this. You don't need to do more than just one, and you don't need to do this for every creature in your scenario here, but maybe this one specific horror puts an infection into the character that slowly twists them and turns them to be a servant of the horror. That vampire example is another good one where vampire, I think their sires can create a thrall. That's a good way to use the fallout. You don't necessarily need to design every fallout of your scenario around this, but this one creature's got this one cool specific one. Just keep that in mind. Another fun way to imply behavior as well. If this creature directly grants this fallout and that it is favorable for the creature, it's going to want to do it. A vampire is going to want a thrall because it does, the easy tasks for them. A thrall can go harvest other victims to bring back to the head vampire, stuff like that. And then to quickly talk about how to create these creatures. This is information that is present in the Investigators Edition of Liminal Horror. I did want to quickly cover it here just in sort of to support what we talked about in that previous slide here. So when you're making your creatures, one of the hardest things here is stats. Like I said, stats are kind of limited here. That is a pro and a con. Pro being you don't have a whole ton to worry about. Con being like figuring out what you should worry about is kind of challenging sometimes. So keep these things in mind. If you're designing ability scores, 10 is going to be your average, your baseline. That's sort of the average when you roll 3d6 for your characters. Think about that in context of the creatures as well. If it is less than 10 or less than 6, as in this case, that's probably pretty weak. If a character has low strength, they're probably going to die pretty quickly. So again, the zombie example, zombies don't have a whole lot of good stats in general. They are threatening when they are brought together in a big group. That's sort of the draw there. So they stumble around. They're not very dexterous. Their muscles are decaying, so they're not very strong. And it's not really hard to hit a zombie. The key with a zombie is it doesn't die unless you destroy the brain, in the traditional sense. So that might be one of the special abilities. So its stats might be dog shit, but it's got that little fun thing. You got to destroy the brain. Getting into the higher end, 14 or higher is going to be some noteworthy in some context. A creature that has 14 strength is a pretty strong creature because that means at a minimum, you have to hit it 3 or 4 times with a basic attack in order to kill it. And combat only lasts a couple of rounds, so a creature with a 14 strength is going to be pretty fucking hard to beat unless you find some other creative way to get around that. And then anything with an 18 or higher is going to be extraordinary in some contexts. That is the very maximum that an investigator can get, but there are creatures that can exceed 18. We typically keep those for like the big bosses, dead gods, formidable creatures, huge monstrosities like Godzilla and stuff. So anything above 18 is going to be extraordinary, especially considering that these stats are associated with saves. If you have a save of 18, that means you only have a 10% chance of failure on any given action that it undergoes that is difficult or dangerous. And if it is 20, then that is assumed success. And so we only use 20 in like very rare situations. So keep that in mind. Now, creatures also have hit protection. And again, this is something we try to beat into folks where hit protection is not your meat points. It is your ability to avoid serious harm. It is close to stamina or your ability to be bruised and keep going, your vigor, what have you. Because HP is recoverable with just a few moments worth of rest. So 3 is average. Most investigators have a D6, so you're looking at 3 or so. If you have 6, it's a pretty sturdy creature. Again, you need to probably do 2 hits with a basic weapon to exceed HP of 6. And then anything above 10 is going to be a serious fucking threat. Because of, sort of the disadvantage that the investigators are always going to be at when it comes to sort of dealing with horrors here. If you're adding armor, most of the time the armor is going to be 0. It does range up to, we say a maximum of 3. Sometimes it exceeds that as per particularly rare creatures, but that's a good baseline. 0 to 3 is like a good range for the type of armor that a investigator might get. between like a sturdy leather coat that can absorb a blow to, you know, full on like ballistic gear, something abstracted to 0 to 3. When it comes to damage, if a investigator is unarmed, they have a damage assumed D4. Any sort of basic weapon bumps you up to a D6 for the most part. So D6 is a really good baseline for your creatures. Again, if it's just a zombie like wailing its arms around, the little dragging grips and throws are probably going to be D4. If it's a bite, like from a zombie, bump that up to like a D6 or D8 because that's usually like where zombies get threatening. And you know, you can kind of adjust accordingly. A creature with sharp claws is probably going to deal at least D6 minimum damage because that's, you know, different from just like a stray blow from a fist. We typically keep that contained about D10. When you get up to D12, that is an enhanced attack, and those are usually based on certain circumstances or situations. Not a whole lot of weapons are dealing D12. Not a whole lot of creatures are dealing that either, unless they are like the Eldritch Gods or whatever, because the D12 can kill an investigator in one hit. You know, drains their HP and hits into their strength. Maybe not break their strength to 0 on just a single hit alone, but enough to trigger a wound, which might result in their death anyway. So keep that in mind. And then you don't have to do this for every creature. This is fun for like your greater horrors, is to give them a critical damage trigger, where investigators in the Liminal Horror are a little sturdier than most folks tend to assume, but that's not always the case because of critical damage triggers. So this is a case where instead of a creature wounding an investigator, they trigger something special, where we are currently writing one of the adventures for the hardcover for the deluxe edition, where it is pulling the Anthromycin from the bloom and using that again in an adventure where if that creature, you know, the flesh hydra, I think we also call it, if that deals critical damage to you, it's picking you up and fucking sticking you to its maw of bodies that, you know, comprises its form, regardless of what your strength is at that point. So you got to be careful. Again, probably not good to do this for every single creature because that's going to get real annoying and you're just going to blow through investigators. But for your big, significant threats, something that you can telegraph, you know, make it known that this is like a big fucker you don't want to screw with, critical damage triggers are fun. This also works the opposite as well. If the creature takes critical damage, I talked about this earlier in behaviors, where you can specify a new change based on it taking critical damage. And then sort of as a cheat sheet here, if you want to avoid it being hit or taking serious harm, you have more HP. If you want it to be able to soak up damage, like it's like a big rock creature or something, maybe you give it armor or high strength in order to do so. If it's physically powerful, you can give it high strength again, or even a larger damage die. Maybe if it's like a big troll that's gonna like pulverize you if it punches you, maybe that's where you go to D12 or a D10 or something like that, where the goal for a troll is not really to battle it straight, it's to figure out how to get around not being hit. You know, so you can give that thing big damage because if you get hit, you're just dead. If the creature is quick, give it high dexterity. Dex saves are kind of rare in Liminal Horror, admittedly, but it is good to the stats like tell a story. You might not necessarily use your dex at any point in time, but that gives the facilitator a clue about how to use that creature. You know, a creature with 18 dex is going to be lightning fast, so it might jut in and out of situations in order to combat. So again, use these stats as a narrative tool as well. And then, you know, if the thing is weird, you can give it high control or give it some ability that deals stress damage directly. I think we got a bunch of these in the Bureau specifically, where these creatures are like inherently corrupting forces that you're facing. So instead of like trying to strangle you to death, they are trying to convert you to also be corrupted. So they deal stress damage primarily. And that like fucks your character up and gives you fallout. Just keep this in mind. Again, most of this is all directly in the Investigators edition of Liminal Horror, and it's stuff that we talk about all the time. So should be a pretty simple process. I did pull a couple of quick examples here. I'm not going to really spend a whole ton of time on these, but these are from what we call the Legacy Edition of Liminal Horror. It's the first scene that came out. don't think many of these got adapted, but these are really good examples of like the lesser horrors that we talked about, where they've got your basic stats, they've got your like little bits of motivation, how to use them. You could go, I can take frogmen, base a session around it, because okay, we know frogmen are probably going to be in amphibious situations, like a swamp location. Maybe I bring it down to Louisiana, bring the frogmen in there. They can create mist clouds and illusions. That's one of their abilities here listed in the bullets. That gives me my my hook. People are going missing in this fog that's mysteriously appearing. Okay, so we get the fog. We've got the frogman as our main antagonist. We've got our location. We've got our hook. One creature. And this is the lesser horror. This is the small bit that we can take and use. And again, we got the behavior too, to remain hidden, to free their master, to inherit the earth. That last one is key here. They're going to use their fog to their advantage. They're going to start taking people because they want that town. They want to inherit the earth. So they're consuming that. Excuse me. They're consuming that town. So you've got your whole adventure right there. One creature. You just need to pull some NPCs and pull a town. Again, 15 minutes worth of prep. There you go. Now these are actually a combination. We got both the lesser and sort of the greater horrors here. These are from the Bloom directly if you haven't seen them. We call the creatures hosts in this case, but they are hosting a fungal infection that is turning them effectively into zombies. Where there are a number of smaller ones we talk about here, where the this is sort of a pretty good breakdown of the various stages of information that you can provide. I would even go a step further with some of the greater horrors here. This was for the context of the module that had a lot of the supporting information here. But if you're just sort of giving a creature on its own, you're going to want to give a little bit more than what we're showing here. But your basic hosts are just, simple creatures, your deer, your bear, which is always a fun one, and like cougars. So things that are threatening, that are now infected with fungus that wants to infect you as well. So these threatening animals are even more threatening. And then you got humans, which are, of course, basically zombies. So with just this one type of creature, the host, we have, 4 different variants here. We've got a cool little, I call it the neural override, but that's the zombie effect where they reanimate unless their strength is reduced to 0. So you got to really like pound these fuckers into the ground. You can't just like make them take critical damage to drop out of combat. That's a case across all the board here. Always double tap when you're dealing with hosts. And then we've got like is it the greater horror, the flesh hydra, the anthromycin. This is the thing that is intrinsically baked into the void crawl as well. It is roaming around the setting. It is 5 people combined into a rat king like creature bound together through fungus. That's coming to fuck your shit up. This is the creature you run from because it will kill you if you stay in combat for more than a round or 2, especially because it can slam the ground and deal blast damage. So it can hit your entire party for D10 if you get close. So, again, you can find this in the Bloom. I think it's a pretty good examples of some ways to make interesting creatures from basic ideas. These are just zombies, but we've spiced them up a little bit in a creative way. And this is the entire center of the Bloom is based around this, set of pages here. Now, to quickly get into Resonant Artifacts. These are our magic items. We call them that because it's a fun name, but Resonant Artifacts are seemingly mundane objects that are connected to paranatural forces, resonant energies, and other planes of existence. They typically take the form of iconic imagery and are wieldable in a utilitarian manner. So we also have dissonant artifacts, which are basically the same thing, but they're not things you can use. They're more of like objects that want to fuck you up too. Well, I'm not really going to cover that in here, but find them in the deluxe edition. So again, resonant artifacts, these are magic items. For all intents and purposes, the way I like to describe them is they are the things that grant humans inhuman abilities in some respect. I think they're just fun to include, and they are vectors for adventure, effectively, where they are tools to help you, defeat the horrors, they spawn in places that the horrors do as well, based on the same kind of weird otherworldly energies that create the horrors to begin with. And they put a target on your character's back. You know, if they're using these things out in public, they're going to attract law enforcement, and they're going to attract the Bureau, and the Bureau is going to want those resonant artifacts. So the players and their investigators have to be careful with how they use these things. So they are useful, but they are also a vector for tension. And so we can build that into the artifacts themselves. So ideally, just a basic description. Tell us what it looks like. Maybe it's a pencil. You know, you could just describe like a pencil. You don't really need to get that detailed into it, or a book, or like AirPod case with, you pull these out and they do special things. You know, you can get a little creative with it. You don't have to be super, you know, stilted. I don't know. So give us a little basic description. Tell us what it looks like. What we like to have for resonant artifacts, at least on our end, is some sort of activation trigger. We need to think of this in the context of how they're used within the game's mechanics. So if we're talking into like a stricter combat, you have actions that you can do on your turn in combat. You know, that's pretty standard for RPGs, and we don't really branch too far outside that for Liminal Horror either. So an artifact is going to take your action, you know, activating it. So usually we want something a little like, not time consuming. That's not really the way to think about it, but something you have to do where it's not just like intrinsic. But some of these things are. So maybe you have a magic ring that you put on, that your activation is really just putting the ring on, and then you have this ability that is always on, or maybe a pendant that you wear that gives you stability. So some of them can be, but the idea is that we want a little bit of tinkering, we want a little bit of mystery around it, because they're not always going to be obvious. But we don't want to make it so bad that the investigator or the player will never figure out how to use them. And the idea that I like to say is that these objects contain a palpable energy, and if you have them in your presence long enough, you're going to figure out how to use them sort of naturally. Like the objects will tell you themselves, but if you want to use them quickly or immediately, you got to tinker a little bit. So give us an activation, give us how it's used, even if that is just put the ring on. And then finally, the effect. This is what we want the artifact to do. Most of the time, I think these artifacts are going to have fairly mundane effects that the players can then use in interesting manner. The two examples that I have here, I'm going to talk about in a second, are fairly mundane, all things considered, but they are vectors for creation. Players can do creative things with them. That's what we want. So we want to encourage here. But if you want to, you can ramp up that. You can make it more powerful. Maybe an artifact that lets you cast lightning from your fingers or something like that. But the more powerful, the more strange, the bigger toll it's going to have. Typically, this is stress on your character, so they have to pay for use of this with, you know, their body. Maybe it takes HP directly. Maybe it takes strength directly, something like that. If the ability is so powerful that it would fundamentally change your character in some way, give it an effect. You know, stress is the easy one. So the two examples I have here are Bronze Angel and the Drachma. Gonna say that wrong. But, so these two are available as part of the case file volume 1. I think in 2 different entries here. Little things that your investigators can find, but they're wielded by NPCs in this case. But again, you can always rip these out and use them for your home game. We've got a shitload of these all over the place. We got some in every one of the modules. I don't think the mall has it, but maybe, I don't remember. But the Bronze Angel is just, you know, a bronze statue. It's about, you know, a foot tall, give or take, and it's got a weeping angel on it. And the idea is that you hold the statue, you have to raise it above your head, and that light will bend around you to drape you in shadows. So from a mechanical design perspective, you cannot use this infinitely. You can't keep this bronze statue above your head for all that long. That's sort of the mechanical effect of the activation here. So its use is going to be limited, but if you're really creative with it, it can be really effective. So light is bending around the user. If you're out in broad daylight, it's not going to mean a whole lot. if you're sitting in a dim room or in a dark room and you hold this above your head, you're going to be invisible functionally. So maybe this helps you get away from a creature. Maybe this helps you ambush someone. Or maybe you just use the bronze statue as a weighted object and beat the fuck out of somebody with it. Like, there you go. There's your Resonant Artifact. Now, the other one, the drachma, the way I've written this is it's an ancient silver coin stamped with the face of a ruler that never existed. So this coin is from somewhere else. Where that is, maybe make an adventure about it. I don't know. Or it could just be some strange otherworldly coin or some custom thing. But the idea is that there's a mystery. We don't know who this ruler is, but they never existed as far as any historical record has of on Earth. Again, this is a very simple one. You're testing feet. Flip the coin on a head. Any simple task you perform immediately afterwards is automatically successful. By simple task here, this is up to GM discretion. I really mean like picking a lock or hopping a fence, something that might be a little tricky that you want to do, but something that lasts a few seconds. Nothing particularly complicated here. But again, up to GM discretion, what they define to be a simple task. I'm leaving that open. I trust you guys to be able to figure that out if you're using this in your own session. The idea is that this luck has a cost. Every time you use it, it costs D6 stress, and you got a 50% chance of it being successful. So you're paying the toll, but if you flip the coin, it lands, on heads. You might have something impactful, but you're paying for it. D6 stress. If you get all 6, that's almost guaranteed to trigger a control save. So you have to be careful. You have to manage this resource. You have to use it sparingly because it's going to fuck your character up if you become too reliant on it. So you have a powerful effect and you have a harsh cost. That promotes interesting choices. So if, again, and you can run entire sessions based simply around this coin or the Bronze Angel or any of these Resonant Artifacts. That's the idea. We want them to be interesting. We want them to be applicable. We want players and people to do interesting things with them. All right, NPCs. So everybody has got different opinions on how to write NPCs. Here are mine. So when it comes to NPCs, you have 2 types. You have your background and your key NPCs. Your background are folks in the background. That's pretty self-explanatory. Maybe they're just like in the crowd, like literally in the background, or maybe they have one scene, like a shop owner, gas station clerk, where your investigators go up and they talk to them for 5 minutes, and then they go away, and then you never have to worry about that NPC again. You throw them in the trash. Key NPCs are the ones that are big players. They are the people who are going to be, driving the action behind the camera. Is probably the best way to think about it. Behind the scenes, where these are NPCs with agency and motivation, but I'll talk about that in a second here. So when it comes to your background characters, you don't really need a whole lot here. Give them a role. What I mean by that is just a way to relate to the setting. I typically think of that as your job. Most of this is modern horror. Most people have a job here, and that's going to be the most useful thing for, GMs or yourself. A carpenter is going to have carpentry skills. That kind of gives you a wide range of things that they can do. So give them a job, but it might be, maybe their role is simply, to be a red shirt. Think of the Star Trek reference where it's like, I'm making this background character because they are going to be killed by the horror. So that's their primary purpose. That's how they're going to relate to the setting. That's how the investigators are going to relate to them, because they're going to find that body later. So you don't necessarily need to always do profession. Just depends on how you want to use these. And again, sometimes it can be like an archetype, like the wise old man. Maybe you only have one interaction with this little kook that's sitting up in like a cabin by the lake that you're investigating. He doesn't need to have a job. He's just there to be creepy old man. So give him that archetype. And then a quick description. And when it comes to background characters, you don't need much. Your players are going to forget about them. So give them one thing to focus on, or maybe 2 or 3. It could be part of their feature. The wise old man has got this long beard that goes down to his chest, and he's wearing broken glasses. Or you can give him a personality quirk. And again, the wise old man, his archetype is his personality quirk. One quick little thing that your players can latch onto to remember this person, because maybe they do come up later. these background characters are really good to be victims for, the horrors, because you might have that one interaction with them that's like super impactful. You never know who your players are going to latch on to when it comes to the characters that you create. So it's good like fodder when they have this one really memorable moment with the wise old man who's saying crazy things up at the cabin, and then a session later he's dead by the side of the lake. There you go. There's motivation. We got to find out who killed this wise old man because we loved him. But again, you didn't really need much. You got the basics right there. He's a dude sitting on a cabin. He's got a big old beard, and he's memorable, and then he's dead. Cool. We don't need to spend a whole lot of time prepping that or writing that. When it comes to your key NPCs, though, this is where you want to spend a little more time. Like I said, it depends on how complicated you want your scenarios to be at your own table, or how you want to hand them to GMs. You don't want to make too many of these people, because your players and their characters are only really going to be able to focus on a handful, and maybe a dozen across a arc of like 6 sessions or so. But these are also people that are going to be making things happen, even if the investigators do not interact with them. Like a town's mayor is a good one. The mayor's always going to be fucking around. The sheriff is going to be trying to solve these crimes in the background as well. And these are people that they help you, maybe they're antagonistic. Some of them you can build them sort of intrinsically there. They are a secondary villain to add complications. So we like to do that with the Bureau these days, where the Bureau, they are a federal, investigative force, but they're not really supposed to be all that good. So they're there for their own purposes, and it does not matter what your investigators are doing. They're going to be doing their own thing. Maybe your goals are aligned when the Bureau is involved, but for the most part, if your investigators are involved, they want to suppress that information. So they don't want your investigators learning these things and getting out there to, disseminate the unknown. So the Bureau is going to be, if you set an agent in there, that is a secondary antagonist in most respects. So keep that in mind. These are people that move and shake and change and add complication to things. So when you're building these NPCs, you don't need a whole lot either. You really just give them a basic description, instead of like the one memorable feature, maybe even 2 or 3, red hair, glasses, and always wears a shirt and tie, something like that. Just things that are easy to remember. And again, your players are going to be interacting with these people in theory multiple times. So just stuff to differentiate them. Each of these people should have a drive. This is what they want. This is something that is outwardly desirable for them. The sheriff wants law and order. The mayor wants to win re-election. The Bureau agent wants to suppress information and defeat the horrors without anybody knowing it. Basic drives. This is going to be how those characters interact with their environments. This is going to be what pushes the characters to do the things that they want to do. These drives. That's always fun to do a secret. Secrets these are things that the investigators may never learn, but you are handing them to the facilitators to help influence how they behave. They might be hidden motivations, there might be complications, just interesting things that can create a different dynamic for these characters. We had secrets for the 2 Bureau agents in the Bloom, where, again, a little spoilers here, but they are corrupted by the same thing that screwed over the Bureau as an agency in the Bureau the module. They have this inherent, like, otherworldly corruption that is working through their system here that is made worse by their connection to Coldwater Lake. So these Bureau agents, they are outwardly acting as Bureau agents undercover, though, so not quite outwardly acting, but again, under the surface, they have this unknowable drive. Like, they don't even control this corruption. It's just pushing them to do things that people don't understand. So that's a secret. You might never uncover that over the course of the module. It might never become apparent, but that's telling you as a facilitator and a GM how to take these characters and put them into like complicated situations. And then I like to have some inherent interactivity. If you want to create a sense of community within your communities, this is a great way to do it. Make the NPCs fucking hate each other or make them love each other. Give them reasons to interact. In the Bloom, we have Cassandra down in the diner. Everybody loves Cassandra. So everybody's going to talk about how they love Cassandra at the diner. And so that motivates your character to be like, maybe we should go to the diner and meet Cassandra. And then Cassandra's got like all of the gossip on the town. So Cassandra can disseminate other information to you. So simply by this little bit of interaction, you are creating this web of information that can be leveraged in a session. If the sheriff, hates the guy down by the dock and wants him gone, maybe there's a reason for that. If you learn that information, go talk to the guy at the dock. The guy at the dock might know more about the horrors that's going on here. So again, you're creating your webs by interweaving your key NPCs. So keep that in mind. It's great. It works, pretty consistently, especially if you have one little bullet point. That's all you really need. You don't need a whole lot more than that. Just a way to quickly connect these characters to each other. So and so was dating who, but is having an affair with, X, Y, and Z. This is Twin Peaks that you're building here. All right, so we got a couple of examples of NPCs here. This is background NPCs. This list comes from the Bloom as well. I'm not going to spend much time here, but quick, we got Elaine up here, a digital nomad who's in her early 30s, bleached hair. And the fun thing is, that little quirk, the unearned sense of entitlement. I bet, I could read that sentence to you. You know exactly who that character is. Just, a sentence effectively, and a name. That's all you really need. You can run that character right now. And then we just got a few more. We can do Wes the camper, beard and a swept-back hair beneath a baseball cap with a pleasant disposition, and just absolutely overburdened with equipment. Again, I can hand that character to you. I guarantee you know how to use them. We don't need much. And then that gives you a scene. That gives you a background NPC. Maybe they become an associate, join on your party. But again, you just have those core character elements. You just need those little archetypal bits, and you're good to go. And then this is an example of one of the more advanced ones, the key NPCs here. So Thomas is a priest, if you want to call him that. I don't think that's even the term I want to use, but one of the leaders of this branch of the Church of Celestial Science. We talk about who the church is a little bit in the Bloom itself. Again, this is from the Bloom. They're Scientologists. I'm not really going to sugarcoat it. It's not quite Scientology in the way that, specifically, but it's very much inherently sort of based around that type of organization where it's a religion, but it's also a business venture. But the Church of Celestial Science is going to be featured a little bit more in the deluxe edition. They are secondary antagonists. They drive a lot of the underlying stuff we're currently writing. But the Church of Celestial Science are a group who are in worship to an otherworldly entity. The catch is that otherworldly entity is real in the world of liminal horror, and as opposed to whatever bullshit the Scientologists believe. Like, these people peddle some bullshit, but their bullshit isn't necessarily all like bullshit. So you'll see more of them later, but that's sort of the basics of what this character is and what he's here for. So the church thinks that something in Coldwater is going to be beneficial for their religion, whether that be a connection with some otherworldly entity that they're paying service to, or something of the sort. It's up for you to decide. Realistically, we kind of left that open, but that's sort of the basic threads that you could pull from. So he's here to do that, and also gain new membership. Coldwater had a traumatic event about a year ago, according to like the module itself, and people are looking for something to bring them together, to give them guidance. So here comes the Church of Celestial Science. They come in, they prey upon these, folk who experience something that they can't quite explain, and giving them something to focus on. This new religion that they're bringing in community, and that's the key here. The church in this module is beneficial, but they are here for a reason that isn't quite beneficial to the town. And it's all based around the minister here. You, as players, may never encounter him. He is intertwined a little bit with the mayor. The mayor's social connections are directly connected to the Church of Celestial Science. I don't think it's quite the way backwards here. Yeah, that's sort of the long and short of it, where you get you a little bit of information. He's here to spread the truth of the search and to increase its membership. And like I said, he believes that the bloom is an extension of the entity which the church seeks to communicate. So you've got outward motivation to gain membership. Then the secret motivation is to learn more, to leverage this membership to gain information that's going to be beneficial to his organization. There you go. Maybe you focus entirely upon this as your secondary antagonist here. Maybe you get the sheriff to help you out earlier in the module, but the priest comes and adds the complication later on when things are starting to get bad, when Coldwater is starting to get overtaken, or at least the region itself. So you don't need a whole lot. This is it. You get your stats, you get like 4 or 5 bullet points, and that's your motivation, that's your drive. You can create chaos with this NPC now. So I did talk about the church already. That is an example of one of the factions that we have here. We're going to put in the deluxe edition. I'll talk about another one in a second here, but you can create your own factions. This is really fun. I love creating factions. I did one for case files that you can go look at now. That's kind of a supplementary one. But factions, these are groups and organizations that may come in contact with the investigators, and that's sort of key here, where you want to create these for use. You can have Jeff Bezos at Amazon and have them as a faction, but like realistically, how are you going to use that at the table? And Amazon is just a service that delivers packages to you. If you're using them as a faction, what's the point of writing them if they're not going to directly interact with your investigators in some manner? And maybe it's fine just that they deliver packages. We don't need to spend a whole lot of attention writing them. So a quick column, detailing Amazon, they deliver packages. Cool. But maybe you want a little bit more. So your factions here can be allies. It's good to have allied factions. We're writing at least one of them into the book here. Or there might be foes. Most of the time they're going to be foes because that's what creates interesting situations. So at a basic level, like I said, you need 2 things. You do the description. Who are they? How do they present to the world? And what are their goals? Amazon is a online digital storefront. Their goal is to make money. That's it. That's a perfect faction, realistically. You can do 13 of those, introduce them into your campaign, and you're good to go, But maybe you want a little bit more. Maybe you want them to, like I said, to directly interact with your investigators. So you got to fill in some details here. And again, this is for your own use or to hand to somebody else to use. So first, who works at this faction? Who are the key personnel? And this is both in a macro and micro sense. Who drives the primary operation of the faction, and who are your investigators most likely to interact with? So I like to think of having like your boss, your middle management, and then your basic workers as a good structure. Put a couple of them in each of them. The boss is like the people who run the thing behind the scenes. Maybe the goal is to finally defeat this boss in the end, in sort of like a monstrous way. Who knows? Your middle managers are the people who these primarily serve as the like antagonistic forces that your characters are going to be interacting with. Those middle managers, they are the bosses that are going to be localized to your locations and not necessarily the big boss. And then the foot soldiers or the basic workers, what have you, are you throw them as cannon fodder to your investigators, but they are the people who are, if you're having a faction set up in this manner, those basic workers are going to be the one that you as investigators interact with the most. But again, they directly report up that chain of command. So building that into your faction, great to have right off the bat. From there, what's their base of operation? Where are they located? Do they have one main office and then several satellite offices? Do they have a base of operation at all? Is this faction working out of a van? Do they have sleeper agents instead of like a centralized location? All good things to think about. This is going to help dictate, like, if their base of operation is in Boston, Massachusetts, and they have satellite offices on the East Coast, this faction's not really going to be present in California unless there's some special circumstance that brings them there. So that helps drive play as well, establishing where they are and how they might relate to your investigators. From there, what do they have at their disposal for resources? And how do they use those resources to achieve their goals? What's their basic operation? Are they secretive? Do they send people undercover to find things? Or do they come in with force? Like a private security firm that comes and claims the thing that they want at gunpoint. Again, this is your interactivity right here. All the other stuff is really high level stuff. This resources and methods, this is how they interact with your investigators on a basic level. And then you can get a little more detailed here. Relationships, it's always good to build those web of information, especially when it comes, if you've got 3 factions at like one city, tell me how they relate to each other, because they're going to be in contact with each other, because that's fun. Then this gives us opportunity for your players to leverage the faction relationships. It's another dynamic to the game here. You're not just fighting the zombies in the streets. You're trying to get corporation that's creating zombies to disappear by manipulating other 2 corporations into attacking them. So you can affect your goals as characters and as players by manipulating this web of information that we're creating with these factions here. And then how do these factions interact with your investigators directly? Are they purely going to be antagonistic? Like the one that creates the zombies is not really going to be handing out jobs because they're trying to kill your characters. So that's fine most of the time. Most of the time, factions can be purely antagonistic, but sometimes maybe you work for them. I'll talk about it in a second here, but the Bureau hands out contracts. Maybe you get co-opted into like some formal investigations for like a federal agency. Maybe the factions are looking for information. They're going to pay for it, giving you incentive to go and find them and interact with them. But again, this is how you build in that interaction. This is how you make your faction useful, is by already kind of figuring out how they're going to approach the investigators. And like I said, that can really just be ignoring them entirely. Most of the time, these big factions and corporations like Amazon does not care about me. I don't really need to build in that interaction. You can just kind of say Amazon doesn't give a shit about even their own employees. So think about it. This is going to help dictate how anybody, you or the prospective GM, is going to use them at the table. So we got the Bureau here. Starting to come close to my time here. I do want to get through this pretty quickly then, because I got a couple more things I want to cover today. Start priming your questions so we can get to them at the end. The Bureau should be a familiar organization to anybody who's read any of our official modules. The Bureau is just a stand-in. They are the paranormal federal agency. They can be whatever you want them to be, and this is by design. We've given them some specifications here, but the idea is that use them in place of the FBI or the CIA or the Bureau of Control or Delta Green or what have you. Like the Bureau is intentionally sort of generic, but they are designed to be the federal force that handles these things, because we know that the government knows that these things exist and they're trying to hide them. So the Bureau is there to do that. So just real quick on what I've got up here. We got a little bit of basic information here. This is just a whole faction in a 2-page spread. This is going to give you enough to run entire adventures. But like I said, these are secondary antagonists. So you want someone else to kind of supplement this. So the Bureau wants to protect mankind from threats of the unknown. And that's sort of like the outward general stated appearance. This just means that they're going to want to control everything and everything that has to deal with these sort of unknown forces here. And they're going to do whatever they want to do it. Even if that is in violation of the civil liberties that you have as citizens of whatever sovereign country you are present in. The Bureau is going to disregard all that to do what they want, because that's what they can do. And then we've given key personnel for the Bureau. We got the Bureau director here, the director's aide, we got a couple of scientists and division heads, and then we've got a couple of smaller folk who your characters might come into more interaction with. Just real quick, like Anna Reyes, the head of operations and acquisitions, probably going to be the person in the field coordinating the effort to acquire the resonant artifact that your character has. So think about it like that. Then real quick, they have a headquarters. If you've read the Bureau, their headquarters is the Monolith. It's located in Seattle. Big spooky building that people can't really see. But they also operate field offices. That's sort of the key there. Bureau agents can be anywhere even if it's not the United States, they will go where they want to go and establish field offices there. Their resources and methods, they are a government agency. They have effectively unlimited money and unlimited resources, but they're going to be mired by bureaucracy. That's the big thing. They can do whatever they want, but they got to do the paperwork for it. But again, they work like any standard fictional federal agent. They're going to go investigate. They're going to flash their badges when they need to, or go undercover. Whatever it takes to get the job done. The Bureau has built-in allies and adversaries here. They have, they're limited by the manpower, and even if they have theoretically unlimited money, they still don't necessarily have everything they always need always. So they might hire out. There's the Bloodstorm group, which is effectively a paramilitary group that we're writing. They'll contract them to do more dangerous jobs. So, like go and root out the mold that exists in this building so we don't have to send our own agents to do it. And then because the Bureau is government agency, they're going to be opposed to basically everyone else. Anybody who deals with anything paranormal, the Bureau is going to have their hands in. So the Bureau is investigating the Church of Celestial Science. Big one. They haven't pulled anything, like formal charges yet, but maybe that's something you do in your campaign. But that they're investigating them because they have to. And then there are, the other factions that we're writing for the Deluxe Edition as well, where they're kind of intently involved with arresting some of these people, or at least monitoring them in some form. And then, like I said earlier, the Bureau might give your players a contract. Like I said, the resources and reach is not unlimited. So they use contractors like Bloodstone to do work, especially if that work is monotonous and boring and they don't want to send their agents or waste their time to do so. So let's say you, in one of your scenarios, you successfully solve the crime and you're noticed by the Bureau afterwards. They come to clean up and they come talk to you and they're like, oh, we're impressed by you. Maybe they hire you on for the next job to do something boring and put you in a dangerous situation they don't want to put their own agents in. So they got a bunch of different contracts they can give you, resonant artifact hunts, destroying limited threats to humanity, so on and so forth. So while, like I said, they're primarily a secondary antagonist, maybe they see value in your group. We got some versatility we can build in here, and that's all based on how they're interacting with the players. All right, so the last one I have here, going to talk about scenarios. I'm going to kind of be quick about this because I have a practical example and we got about 15 minutes left here. This is like pulling it all together. You don't need to write scenarios with your information here, but this is how to take that information and put it in a way that kind of makes sense here. The most important thing, when you are planning a session, this is sort of anecdotal evidence. I have run a shitload of stuff in the last few years. I run a lot of one-shots and limited campaigns. I've run convention games. I used to do, once COVID started, I was doing any online convention I could get a part of. And all of these things are sort of useful things that I've kind of learned over the course of that. In a standard 3 to 4 hour session, your group of like 4 players, it gets a little more if the more players you get, the more time things are going to take. So in a 3 to 4 hour session of about 4 players, you're really only going to have time to do 6 to 12 things. 4 to 6 of those are going to be meaningful interactions. So what I mean by things, a thing might be an encounter, it might be investigating a room, it might be a conversation with an NPC, it might be overcoming a trap. These are just, the stuff that you encounter over the course of your investigation. You're only going to have time to do at most about a dozen of them. Maybe you get lucky and do a few more. But keep in mind, this is sort of like an average. And what I mean by meaningful interactions, these are the things that take up time. They, if you go into a dungeon room and it's empty, you look around, you maybe waste 3 minutes talking about it amongst your group and then you're gone. That's not really a meaningful interaction. The room is just there and it's empty. But if it takes 5, 10, 15 minutes, that's something a little bit more meaningful, something you should prepare for. So if a trap is there and you're trying to find a way to get around it without triggering it, that's a meaningful interaction. It's going to take up time at your table. So when you're building your scenarios, this is a good general rule to keep in mind. If you want a single location to be the focus of one session, Give it 10 rooms. Give it a dozen rooms. There is a piece of advice from the Stockholm Cartel guys when designing a dungeon. Give it 13 rooms and leave half of them empty. So again, that's similar advice here. You're only going to really be able to do a dozen rooms. Again, if we're talking about the context of a dungeon here. So think about that. That's all you really need for one session. If you want 3 sessions in a town, give the town as one big one, give 2 detailed locations, and then a bunch of like smaller ones. You know, you don't need to give the Panera Bread like a detailed description. It can just kind of be there. They can stop in the Panera Bread to get lunch. Cool. You don't need to be more worried than that. So keep it contained. If you want to do small horror, keep the objective straightforward. Again, for one shots, the thing I do in one shots is always make your end objective clear in terms of like the players need to know what their goal is. This doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be like specific. It just needs to be clear. So if you wake up and you're in a spooky house, you don't know how you got there. Your goal is to escape it. That's very clear, you know, and it keeps the players moving forward because you're going to want to keep them moving forward if you want to finish this by the end of your session here. Limit overhead. And what I mean by this is if you are writing this for yourself or you're writing this to give to someone else, there is a certain amount of text you will find in adventures for RPGs, especially trad RPGs, that is fucking useless. All this background lore that doesn't necessarily give the GM really anything to work with at the table. So if you're writing this for a single session, you're writing this for short form horror, get rid of the useless junk. Focus on the things that are going to be most impactful for the table, the things you need to worry about. Okay, so like there's a ghost that's terrorizing this town. You will tell that, okay, so the ghost is a woman who was killed by an adulterous husband, so she goes after, you know, adulterers and kills them. Good background lore. I don't really need to know that this woman had a mother, a father, 3 brothers, and a sister that died 100 years ago, because you're never going to deal with that. So cut your overhead. Don't worry about it. Give the core ideas. Keep the preserved ideas. Save yourself time. Save yourself prep. Save yourself reading. Save the person you're handing this to all of that time as well, and just edit your shit down. You don't need to go overboard on creatures when you're doing these scenarios. 1 is sometimes enough. And if you're trying to do a single session or short form content, maybe 3. You don't need to do like 16. That's just going to be too many. You cannot have meaningful interactions with that many creatures within the span of your 1 or 3 sessions. So you can have versatile creatures. You can design, you know, different forms of zombies or what have you, but we are trying to get this to the table quickly. We're trying to use this quickly, and we're only really worrying about a few sessions here. So don't go overboard. Again, keep it contained. And then you always want to make sure there's a source of tension, because that is going to drive your players forward. There's no tension, you're going to get analysis paralysis. You're going to have players who are sitting there doing nothing, and you're going to waste time, you know, for the horror scenario here. The tension doesn't have to be present at all times. You just want to make sure it's there, because this is, you're chasing your characters up a tree or forcing them to action. This is a horror we're writing. You know, this isn't, you know, a folktale adventure where you're, you know, making hot cocoa and gathering around a campfire, unless you're in a camping scenario. So keep it contained. Make sure you have a source of tension. Cut the overhead. That's really it. I do want to walk through a scenario that I've written here, trying to keep it contained on time. I think we can go a little bit over on time as long as Ryan doesn't have anything else to do. But so we're going to wrap all these up, bring it all together, and I got an example scenario. This is Second Dawn. This is one of the 3 things that I have put in the Case Files Volume 1. You can get this for free. It's downloadable. This is every one of these things I've talked about all contained into one. We've got a faction here. We've got creatures that we can deal with here. We've got a limited location, and we have an escalating sense of tension. I'm going to be quick about this because you guys can go read this on your own. Second Dawn spawned from watching an episode of X-Files. It's in the 2nd season. The episode is called 3. But the idea is in that X-Files episode, there are vampire lifestylers. That's what they're called. This is the 90s. This is the Vampire the Masquerades, and people doing it for real. That they're killing people. In the investigation, this is one that early in the second season. So it's, I think, the one of the first times in the series that Mulder is on his own without Scully in the background, because she's recovering from events that happened earlier in the season. So the idea is like, there was something funky going on about these vampire lifestylers. It's like, it's never confirmed that they're actually vampires, but that's the implication that the episode wants you to think. And that's the weird things that are happening are kind of stylized in that manner. And it's really open-ended in the ending. Like, it's not like a good resolution. Bad stuff happens and nobody gets any closure. And it's like, great. All right. So that episode right there is perfect for liminal horror. It's exactly what we want. So I wrote it. So Second Dawn is. Now, we're taking this idea, we're taking this one bite-sized piece of television, and we're bringing it into liminal horror, and we're going to change it because I'm not just going to copyright it because I want to do my own thing. So what I did with Second Dawn, we got this faction here. They are a group of vampire lifestylers. There are three main ones. There's Alara, Everett, and Emrys, who the fun thing is here is like they're Twilight fans who think they're really vampires. But then a fourth member joins their group, Victoria. After this fourth member joins their group, they start killing people, doing ritualistic murders. The Bureau ignores this because they think it's a mundane serial killer. And the thing is there's a pattern. They kill 6 people, then they leave, they disappear. And they've been doing this for about a year. Every like 3 months or so, they pop up. So this is like the 9th month or what have you. You can kind of specify what you want in your sessions. But we have in here basic description. We have our key personnel are 4 NPCs that we're going to be dealing with here. The ritual that they're doing when they sacrifice all these people because they think they're really vampires. So they are consuming the blood and trying to gain the life force power of their victims. That's sort of the long and short of it. We know here their base of operations. At the moment, this scenario is set in Portland, Oregon. They are staying in a abandoned or semi-abandoned warehouse space there that they've sort of taken over, and that gives you your. They are working out of this place, and all the murders happen around it. So that gives you your map. You can start putting pins on the board and doing your location analysis here to figure out that they're only killing people within this area. So we only need to focus on this one area. I talk a little bit about the resources and methods. This is how they take their victims. I do mention that the Bureau is present at some point. They're not really paying that much attention to it, though. And then I give you ways to use them. You can take this and make it the primary focus. This is probably 2 or 3 sessions worth of content. I don't think this is a single session, just given the scope of it. And then there are, what I've given here for players, or best for GMs, is clues. Because we're doing this in a limited format, these clues are general. Put them anywhere you need them. When you find a location and your investigator's interested in it and they're looking into it, maybe one of these clues makes sense. Pull it out and put it at the location. Do what you wish with it. Versatile. It's not specific, and I can keep this contained to half a column on one page instead of, bulking up the actual locations themselves. The key with the Second Dawn, one of them is really a vampire. So Victoria, the newest member that has joined the group, is really a vampire. Hasn't been one for very long. And what she's trying to do is, I can kind of flip to that next page. She is keeping herself safe. She's not a particularly strong vampire, not a particularly powerful one. So she is manipulating these other 3 into thinking that they're really vampires so that she can get them to harvest the blood of the victims to bring them back so she can consume it. That's your adventure. So the idea is that this starts out with ritualistic murders. You start learning clues. You're clued in. The first thing you think of when you're an investigator, oh, there's vampires here. The more you learn, the more you're like, oh, they're not really vampires, they're people. And then you get to the end and like, oh, never mind, there's really a vampire there. So you get that arc of your investigation as you're going across this here. And so this spread that we've got up here are 4 NPCs. One of them is like a proper creature. We've given them stats. I've given them interesting complications. Each of them has a little secret about what they are dealing with the group, and that's going to imply other things that happen in the adventure where Alara does not like that Victoria has come in. She's feeling threatened for power. So maybe Alara is going to be an ally in the future. Gets disillusioned with the bad things that Victoria is doing. Everett is the financier using a trust fund to supply the group with the means to continue to move around. But the problem is his trust fund has run out. He hasn't told anybody. So he's getting sloppy and stealing things and leaving clues that you can follow for your investigators. Emrys is mildly psychic. So they have some inherent ability due to some connection with an otherworldly force. But that sort of drives their tension within the group because Emrys cannot read thoughts and feelings of Victoria, but can read that of the others. So if they were all vampires, they shouldn't be able to read any of them. So there you have this underlying tension here just by nature of this kind of psychic ability existing. And then Victoria or here is a vampire, and I didn't do anything particularly crazy with the stats here. It's a pretty classic vampire. Can't go out in light, affected by your typical silver and what have you. Formidable creature. You're gonna have to be really smart when you approach this once you figure out that Victoria is actually a vampire, and very capable of taking out your investigators. So again, this is just 2 pages here. We've got a whole lot to work off of with the adventure already, and then we get into the setting itself. And this is just a little section of downtown Portland. I've given a bunch of locations here. You can keep your entire adventure contained within this area. I have flagged key spots. Anything else in these buildings you can fill in yourself. I don't really need to give this to you. More restaurants, more bars, more locations and stuff. We're dealing with the real world here. Your players know the real world. They've been in a city, theoretically. So you don't always, as a writer, you don't need to give everybody everything because they know it. I don't need to describe a corner store because you've probably been to one. Like a 7-Eleven has got soda and it's got snacks and a counter. Cool. Write those 3 things down there. You don't really need to worry about it. This isn't like some medieval bar or tavern that your players have never seen in real life. These are places that they go to all the time. So we got, a section of downtown, a whole neighborhood in 2 pages. Cool. You don't need more than this. And again, this is 2 or 3 sessions worth of content. This is 6 pages. But when we got our locations here, we've got some interesting things. Yeah, we got basic description, and then a bunch of them have like little bits and pieces. The murders are happening all around this neighborhood. I've given you a little doom clock here. The vampires are gonna take 6 victims and then disappear forever. That's your tension. If you do not find them out by the time that they claim their 6th victim, they're gone, and you'll never see them again. Well, theoretically, and they pop up 3 months later. Then you can go try and chase them down if you really want to continue with it. But each of these victims has clues associated with them. They have a location that they're found, and that will start driving you around the map as you're investigating. There's only going to be more bodies piling up. There's your central tension, and you can start figuring out things by just tracking where the murders are happening and tracking locations. Maybe your investigators now want to set a trap and try and get those vampires for themselves or find out more. Maybe they can talk to some NPCs that leads them to another location. This is all built in. This is 6 pages. There you go. That's all you need. And again, I'd recommend going in, finding this. It's available for free. You can go ahead and give it a read. I think it's pretty good. But that brings us to the end of our seminar here. We are starting to run low on time. I do want to get to some questions that we have here, and we've got a handful of them waiting for us. I got to keep this contained, though, so let's try and do quick. Oh, you're muted on my end, if you can still hear me.
I got a couple corralled here, so let me just pick a couple. I think one of them you touched on already. So how do you best determine the size and scope of a project, and what are some practices to stay within that scope?
Yeah, I think I touched a little bit about this earlier, talking about the scenario here. It's really just your intended use. This advice is going to be kind of applicable across the board. You can do like 6 to 12 things, 6 locations in a single building, what have you. 10 is a good, nice number per session. If you want 3 sessions, maybe you need 30 things. That's probably a little bit much, but that might just be rooms or what have you with simple locations. So one session, you can get building or town or anything like that. 10 is a good number to keep it contained. You do also want to write some stuff in there that the players will never encounter because you want to road agents, so you don't know where things are going to go. But if you're writing 45 locations for a single adventure, they're never going to see them. Don't bother with it. Keep it contained. That's really the long and short of it. We don't need to get more complicated than that.
I think you did touch on a bunch of these already. What are some good ways to use tropes while keeping short form horror feeling fresh?
Yeah, I did. This is another one that I did briefly talk about how I took the X-Files episode and twisted it. Tropes are good. Love tropes. Super easy to bring to your table. Very easy for your players to get engaged with because they're probably already familiar with those tropes. Thing is, like, we've seen the tropes. There's not a whole lot of things you're gonna do that are 100% wholly unique. So go ahead and borrow those tropes, steal those stories. But I've never seen your version of that story. Never seen your version of that trope. So just think about, like, you might like that base story. Take that core idea, bring it to your table, and then put a twist on it. The easy one was like the zombies are infected with cordyceps instead of whatever the brain disease that's typically affecting zombies. That's a spin, and that nature of it, making it fungus based, changes how everything interacts outward from there. You've taken your basic trope of zombies, you've given it just a tiny little spin, and that already changes how they interact because they're not trying to just spread by bite. They're trying to spread a fungal infection. So their behavior is going to change. If we're talking The Last of Us, because that's actually cordyceps, the cordyceps grows on them and bursts out of them in a fungal form. And that gives you your secondary zombie, your clicker, who use echolocation because the cordyceps is on their face. So use your tropes and put a spin on it. I think that's the long and short of it there. Do something creative with them. But tropes are good.
Again, I think the X-Files one addresses this question, but I wanted to say it. Do you have any examples of short form media, like a movie plot might map to a full adventure, but what analogy relates to a short form? And I think, like I said, that with the that X-Files TV episode kind of answers that a little bit as a kind of shorter form than a full movie.
Yeah. Existing media. You've got just not even talking about TV for a second here or movies. If you find there are tons of authors that do short story collections. Stephen King does them, Edgar Allan Poe. If you want to subject yourself to reading H.P. Lovecraft, you can do that. Look up the folk who wrote Lovecraftian stuff back in the day. They all typically worked for these like science fiction magazines and like weird science and horror stuff. They're all writing short stories. Even if you don't want to deal with the abhorrent shit that Lovecraft was saying and writing, his contemporaries, they're all doing a lot of the same stuff. It's all really good for the most part, and it's all really inspiring. So read those little short stories. There's 100-year-old book that your players never even heard of, written from an author contemporary of Lovecraft. You might be able to rip that directly and just bring it to the modern horror. But beyond that, in sort of the modern context here, looking at television and TV and movies are a really easy way to do it. The X-Files is such a great example for Liminal Horror because the nature of the episode of television, it has to meet that 45 minutes or whatever to meet the hour time block. So they have to keep things contained. There's typically one creature that's the focus of it. They have a contained location for almost every single episode. They all follow like a similar story arc. And once you watch 3 of them, you know how it works. Supernatural is another good one. Supernatural gets a little out there when it gets into later seasons, but those first like 3 or 4, they go to a location, they find a horror, they fight it. That's great. That's all you really need. And then honestly, any horror movie is going to be kind of constrained by this nature. Alien is kept within the ship. Saw is like, you're in that one location where they torture the shit out of you. The movies, they have like 2 hours to kind of give it to you. So a lot of times those movies are going to be contained. So It's drawing inspiration from anything. Look at some media, find some horror stuff, steal their ideas, make them your own. But again, X-Files, go watch X-Files.
Yeah.
That's the perfect
Yeah.
answer.
Let me grab one more. But once again, I think that your presentation was incredibly thorough because you pretty much answered all these questions. But is there anything you should include in short form horror pieces that makes it easier for facilitators to run the game?
I know. I don't think there is a right answer for this. You just it's really like what you want to cut is more about it. So the example that I've got is Impossible Landscapes by Arc Dream or Delta Green. Impossible Landscapes, one of the best RPG books ever written. Not easy to get to the table. It is 30 to 50% too long. And it trips people up. People are buying this book. They see like there is such a good campaign contained within that books, but it's so fucking hard to get that book to the table because it was written from people who wanted to tell a story and not necessarily support an adventure that's easy to run. You can see it as you flip through the pages of that book. They're just doing their version of the King in Yellow, which I love the King in Yellow. I can't get that to my table. So yeah, cut the shit. I mean, that's really it. It's like keep your core concepts focused on things that are immediately impactful at the table. That doesn't mean have no lore. That doesn't mean have no like narrative or story. You can still have all of those things, but focus on the core concept. You know, I like to have a doom clock. I'm not going to say every adventure needs a doom clock because it doesn't. Doom clock is your timeline if the investigators don't intercede. It's the things that happen. It's the horrors trying to achieve their goals. That's a good one. That is built-in tension right there. You've got like 6 steps. The horror is made apparent by the end of it. Cool. If that helps you structure your adventure in your own writing, make a doom clock for everything. Maybe you don't even use it in the final publication, but it's good to think about those type of things. But it's really just the number one thing you should include is non-static features. These are not video games. These are not things waiting for your players to interact with them. They are moving and shaking. That leads into the tension, that leads into your NPCs, that leads into your creatures. They all have motivations. They all have things that they want to do. You just don't really need to get that complicated with it. You know, for a single session, a creature killing things is good. You know, an underlying corruption, vampires. Cool. Don't need to get more detailed than that. Keep it easy, keep it simple, keep it straightforward. Give that source of tension. Cut the shit.
Yeah, I like one thing you said. It's you know, you're playing a game. You're not telling a story. Like, you are not telling the story. The player's actions are telling a story. So like, I've definitely read adventures that I'm like, you could have just written a book here. Like, that's clearly what you wanted to do, but you're playing the game. So if you're writing an adventure, make it gameable. You know, ask the questions, don't give the answers. And you guys do that a lot, or you do it extremely well with Liminal Horror. So it's nice to get these seminars to kind of get people to where you guys are.
Yeah, that's the thing where it's like, I don't have the answers to the things I write, and that's by design. You know, it's like the big example here, because we put it in 2 modules, is in the Bloom and the Bureau. There's this thing called the Coldwater Lake incident. I don't know what that is. I intentionally don't know what this thing is, and I'm not telling anybody what it is because it's more fun to just think of it as like this thing that happened that nobody knows. So there is no answer. We don't need an answer because it's an event in the past that has sort of triggered these horrible things that are happening now. But knowing what happened during that incident doesn't really affect what's happening now. You know, the Coldwater Lake incident brought the corruption into the monolith of the Bureau, and it like fucked the Bureau up. Doesn't matter what happened during it. No, because your players are dealing with the fucked up monolith at the moment. Like, who cares if they found out that this one artifact that they brought back that's connected to some otherworldly force is causing the corruption? They can't do anything about that. That happened in the past. It's cool information. It's a little bit of lore, but it's not gameable. And then even in the Bloom happens a year later. The townsfolk don't know what happened because the Bureau covered it up. The Bureau is never going to tell you because they covered it up. The Bureau agents who are there don't actually really know what happened either, the ones that you might have direct interaction with. And the core concept of the horror isn't actually involved with what happened during the Coldwater Lake incident. So it's like, it's a cool thing. There's no answer because it didn't matter.
Right.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
so
well, I
leaving
think
leaving those questions open is good. You don't need to have the answers, and it's that's the great thing about horror and even like fantasy and whatnot. It's like they're great most of the time, especially if you're asking questions. But if you've created a good foundation and you've got a good bunch of gameable stuff and it all makes sense, you can leave some things open, some things mysterious. That saves you a lot of time writing too.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, just like both actually and abstractly, like as soon as you see the monster is less scary because you'll always make it worse in your mind. And that is actually seeing a monster, or like you said, like knowing what like actually happened. It's always going to be worse until you're given the answer.
Mhm.
But yeah, so I think that's the bulk of the questions. I think all the other ones are kind of like have been touched on already. So that I think that's us. I think.
Okay. So if you guys are watching this live and you think of some stuff after we kind of go off, or you are catching the VOD sometime later when this hits YouTube, and you get to the point where you have a burning question, we just didn't cover it over the extent of it, come to the Liminal Horror Discord server. There are links all over the place if you can't find it. We have a channel specifically there that's called Seminar Questions. Go ahead and dump your questions into that channel there. Now that the seminar is over, when we got some time, we'll come through and try and answer those as well. And also, we want to do more of these seminars. These are fun. Every couple of months, we're not going to try and do them too frequently because they're a pain in the butt to prepare. But if there are things you want to see us talk about specifically, if there are topics you expect us to cover or would love to see us cover, please shout them out in that Seminar Questions channel. We're taking ideas. I've got a thought on what I want to do with the third one, but that's going to be months in the future. So always open to change. If there's something that's going to be helpful, please come to us. We're trying to help this community foster and grow. That's the whole point of doing these little seminars here too, as well. So we want to hear from you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these are great. I know that I just kind of sit in the background a lot during it, but it's really fun to learn and to get all this information because I actually get all these things like sent to me, and then I get to peruse it at my own time. So it's nice to have that, and we always appreciate you guys coming on the show. We love Liminal Horror, and we love Josh and Goblin Archive. So it's really fantastic to not only be a part of the community, but to be able to engage with you guys as much. So these are always great. Like Josh said, we want to do more of these, and we will always be a space that you guys will be able to do that on as long as you want us. So we'll be here for that. As Josh said, the links to everything will be below. I'll make sure that he sends me all of those so I remember to put them in. If you aren't here right now, this is a VOD or a pod for you, so just click below to where they always are, as they have been for 200 episodes, and we'll make sure you have those, and I'll get Josh to send me a link to the an invite link to the Discord as well, if that's the thing, so you guys can just click on the VOD or the pod below for that. And I think that's it. Keep an eye out on Space Penguin for Hungry Hollow when that comes out, and as we do, Jarrett will be on every month talking, so we will make sure that when we know that it is available. Josh, any last words to wrap up the writing seminar 2?
No, just some shilling.
Chill away.
So keep an eye out in the future, especially for Liminal Horror stuff. We should have another module from some folk. It's the winner of the Twisted Classics competition. We're going to try and get that into print for a wider audience soon. That should drop in maybe like a month or two. It's coming up soon. We got to figure out what the hell we're doing with it. A lot of third party folk are also making their things, so keep an eye out. We got some fun stuff coming. Next year is when the deluxe edition is coming officially. We're targeting March for the crowdfunding, and we want to be done before we start crowdfunding so we can hit print as soon as possible. So by this time next year, you should have your books in your hand if you come and get them. But we're gonna launch the pre-back page, whatever the fuck it's called, sometime in the next couple of months. Keep an eye out for that. And for folk who like horror, November is Mothership Month. there are a bunch of really cool projects going on, a bunch of folks that I really like who are doing stuff there. Keep an eye out for that. I do have something coming up in one of those things as an add-on. So come follow me on social media and I'll, shout to the heavens about it when it comes time. But that is coming up in a few weeks.
Yeah. And we're doing something for that. We're still figuring it out. We have a lot of mothership people in our small weekly scroll community that we are bouncing some ideas and stuff off. So definitely be prepared for a big chunk of our November stuff for you to be mothership related. And if you're listening to this after November, it's not applicable to you. You're fine. It's cool. But I think that's it. Yeah, go watch the VODs. Get Mothership 1E. We're done. That is Liminal Horror writing Seminar 2, writing short form horror. Once again, Josh, thanks for coming on. Thanks for having us here to do that with you. And we will see you all for the next one. Bye.